Today I'm going to talk about the descending tracts. So in my previous video I showed you that the descending tracts including pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts. I discussed the pyramidal tract like corticospinal tract in my previous video and extrapyramidal like rubrospinal tract. In this video I'm going to show you the vestibulospinal tract, which is related to the balance. Think about it, when you're losing your balance, how do you take your balance? So I'm going to show you the mechanism of the balance, how your cortex, brain, cerebellum, and also inner ear, they're working together, sending some information to the vestibular nuclei of the brainstem, and then it's sending down some information to the spinal cord to take your balance. So vestibulospinal tract, as its name suggests, it's starting from the vestibular nucleus and runs all the way down to the spinal cord. If you watch my previous videos about the brainstem, you are familiarized this model. So this model shows you the brainstem from the anterior view. At the top, you can see the midbrain. In the middle, this projection is the pons, and down here you can see the medulla oblongata. So this is the brainstem. So from the posterior view, you can find some nuclei. These are the nuclei that you can see. At the border of the pons and medulla, here is the pons, this is the medulla, you can find this diamond-shaped nucleus. This diamond-shaped nucleus is vestibular nucleus. So vestibulospinal tract starts here from the vestibular nucleus. So imagine that in this image, at the top we have the brain. In the middle you can see the brainstem. Behind the brainstem you can find the cerebellum, and down here we have the spinal cord. So this is the midbrain. This projection is pons, and down here we have medulla. So at this level we have diamond-shaped nucleus. It is called vestibular nucleus. So as I mentioned in my previous videos about the descending tracts, all descending tracts, they contain two neurons, upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. So you should ask yourself, where is the cell body of these two motor neurons? Where is the cell body of the upper motor neuron? So the cell body of the upper motor neuron of the vestibulospinal tract is within the vestibular nucleus here. Imagine that this is the cell body of the upper motor neuron of the vestibulospinal tract. And then the axon exits the vestibular nucleus and runs all the way down and crosses the medulla and then crosses the spinal cord. So the key point is that there is no decussation. It does not cross the midline. They are not crossing each other to the opposite side. So for the pyramidal and extrapyramidal that I showed you in my previous videos about the corticospinal and rubrospinal, they are crossing the midline. So it's called decussation. There is no decussation for the vestibulospinal tract. So it's ipsilateral. So I mean it runs all the way down at the same side, from right side nucleus to the right side of the spinal cord. Left side nucleus to the left side. It's ipsilateral. It's not contralateral because there is no decussation. There is no crossing the midline. So when it gets into the spinal cord, if you take a cross section through the spinal cord, we have something like this. At the center we have this butterfly-shaped gray matter, which is surrounded by the white matter. Gray matter has ventral horns and dorsal horns, and white matter has columns, ventral, dorsal columns, and two lateral columns. So vestibulospinal tract, when it gets into the spinal cord, it lands here, the ventral column. So imagine that it's landing here like this. And what will happen then? The upper motor neuron axon getting into the ventral horn, synapsing into the cell body of the lower motor neuron. So the second question is answered. the cell body of the lower motor neuron of the vestibulospinal tract is within the ventral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. Then the axon of the lower motor neuron exiting the ventral horn and passing through the ventral root to get into the muscles. So which muscles are supplied by the vestibulospinal tract? Mainly the extensor muscles. Extensor muscles, or you can classify it as the anti-gravity muscles. Why? Because the gravity wants to pull you down to lose your balance, but vestibulospinal tract supplying the extensor muscles of the limb and extensor muscles around the vertebral column to extend you and taking the balance. Imagine that when you are losing your balance, you will be collapsing. Flexor muscles, flexing your limbs, flexing your vertebral column, and then you can finally fall down and lose your control. But in contrast, vestibulospinal tract stimulating the extensor muscles of the head and neck, extensor muscles of the vertebral column, extensor muscles of the arm, upper and lower arm, and then extending you to take your balance. That's why it is really, really important and relevant to the balance. So the point is that vestibular nucleus are stimulated by inner ear and cerebellum. You know, inner ear has two parts. This is the cochlear part. This part is the cochlear part, which is relevant to the hearing. And this part is known as the vestibular part. Vestibular part of the inner ear, which is relevant to the balance. So what's going on? When you are losing your balance, the vestibular part of the inner ear, there are some fluid like epilymph, perilymph and endolymph. They're moving related to the movement of your head and neck. So we have different movement. So they will send some information to the vestibula through the cranial nerve 8. So cranial nerve 8, it's called vestibulocochlear nerve. So it's carrying the information from the inner ear, mainly the vestibular part of the inner ear, and is stimulating the vestibular nucleus. So which information coming from the inner ear? So inner ear sends some information to the vestibular nucleus, tells the vestibular nucleus about this situation, about the position or posture of the head and neck. When you are losing your control, your head and neck moving. So we have different like linear acceleration, we have rotational acceleration. So all those information about the position of the head and neck carrying to the vestibular nucleus through the cranial nerve 8 from the vestibular part. So what about the next resource? We have cerebellum. Cerebellum, if you watch my previous videos, cerebellum receives some information from joints of the upper limb and lower limb and column, vertebral column, about the unconscious proprioceptive. So unconsciously, cerebellum knows the position of your body, joints, bones in this air. So it's called spinocerebellar. So inner ear knows about the position of your head and neck, and cerebellum knows about the position of the limbs and vertebral column. So it receives some information from the spinal cord. It's called the spinal cerebellum. And then it sends some information to the vestibular nucleus and stimulate the vestibular nucleus. From the nucleus, within the cerebellum, there are 4 different types of deep nuclei. One of them is called vestigial nucleus. So vestigial nucleus sends some information to the vestibular nucleus. Now, vestibular nucleus received 2 afferents from 2 different places. One of them is coming from the vestibular part of the inner ear, about the head and neck position. The other one is coming from the vestigial nucleus of cerebellum, related to the unconscious proprioceptive of the rest of the body. And then it sends down the information to the spinal cord and finally to the muscles through the VestibuloSpinal Tract, and then extends the muscles of the head and neck, extends the muscles around the extensor muscles of the contracts the extensor muscles around the vertebral column, and contract the extensor muscles of the upper and lower limb, and finally take your balance. So in the bottom line, when you lose your balance, cerebellum and inner ear, they get aware of the position of your body, and they send information to the vestibular nucleus in the brainstem and stimulate the brainstem and ask brainstem to make the balance again. So brainstem, when it's stimulated, it will send some information to the spinal cord and finally to the extensor muscles through the vestibulospinal tract, and then it extends the whole muscles of the body to make the balance again. So this is the whole mechanism of the taking the balance. If you have any question, please put your questions into the comment and receive the great feedback. Thank you so much.